He only asked for one night. 4 months later, the whole town was shocked.
The wind that blew through the valley of Blackwood didn't just carry the chill of late autumn. It carried the suffocating weight of a town that buried its secrets deep beneath the frozen earth. To the outside world, Blackwood was a picturesque, quiet community nestled safely between the mountains. But to those who lived there, it was a place where judgment was swift, gossip was currency, and mercy was a rare commodity. At the very edge of this isolated town, where the cracked gravel road dissolved into overgrown weeds and thorny briars, stood a decaying, two-story farmhouse. This was the lonely domain of Eleanor Vance. For 7 long years, the townsfolk had treated the 72-year-old widow like an absolute ghost. They passed her house with rolled-up windows, whispering cruel rumors about her reclusiveness, completely blind to the profound, aching loneliness that consumed her days since the sudden tragic loss of her husband and son. Then came the night. The stranger walked out of the freezing fog. His name was Julian Vance, though no relation to Eleanor, a man whose weathered, gaunt face and hollow eyes spoke of a long, brutal journey through the darkest corners of the country. He carried nothing but a worn, heavy canvas backpack and an impenetrable silence. When he knocked on Eleanor's door in the absolute dead of night, he didn't beg for money, nor did he ask for food. He simply stood on the porch, shivering violently, and asked to sleep in her old, dilapidated barn for a single night to escape the biting frost that threatened to claim his life. Eleanor, deeply accustomed to the cruelties of strangers and the cold shoulders of her neighbors, saw something in Julian's exhausted, desperate eyes that mirrored her own broken spirit. Without a word, she pointed a frail, trembling hand toward the crooked wooden structure at the back of her property. That single quiet act of human permission was the catalyst for a sequence of events that would completely shatter the peace of Blackwood forever. Because Julian didn't leave the next morning. One night turned into a terrifying week, then a month, and as the heavy winter snow began to blanket the valley, the old barn became shrouded in an impenetrable mystery. Nobody ever saw Julian leave the property, yet strange, rhythmic thumping sounds and metallic vibrations echoed from the barn at all hours of the night, shaking the frozen ground. Blackwood's local sheriff, a cynical, easily swayed man named Thomas Miller, started noticing unusual, heavy flatbed deliveries heading toward the widow's property under the cover of darkness, sparking a wave of paranoid gossip that spread through the town square like wildfire. The townspeople became utterly convinced that Eleanor was harboring a dangerous fugitive, or worse, that something deeply sinister and illegal was being manufactured inside that securely locked barn. What they didn't know was that Julian possessed a secret so monumental, it had the power to completely rewrite the history of the entire valley. For 4 months, the tension built to an absolute boiling point, fueled by judgment, fear, and the eerie, glowing blue lights that suddenly began emanating from the barn's rotted wooden cracks after midnight. The townsfolk demanded blood and answers, their hostility growing with each passing day, completely unaware that the countdown to an unforgettable, world-altering revelation had already begun. The hostility in Blackwood reached a fever pitch by the arrival of the 2nd month, as the town's paranoia turned into a coordinated campaign of intimidation. Sheriff Thomas Miller, constantly pressured by the wealthy, corrupt town council leader, Arthur Pendleton, began driving past the Vance property multiple times a day. The flashing lights of his cruiser casting ominous shadows against Eleanor's windows. Arthur Pendleton wanted Eleanor gone. He had been trying to legally seize her valuable, resource-rich land for years, to expand his commercial timber empire. And this mysterious and unnamed stranger lurking in the barn gave him the perfect leverage to orchestrate her eviction. Rumors mutated wildly from simple trespassing to terrifying allegations of bomb-making and chemical manufacturing. Yet, whenever Sheriff Miller stopped his cruiser at the edge of the property, he found nothing tangible to make an arrest. There was only the oppressive, rhythmic sound of metal striking metal echoing from within the barn, and the stoic, unyielding silhouette of Eleanor standing on her porch guarding the perimeter like a silent sentinel. Eleanor's relationship with Julian had silently evolved into a profound, unspoken alliance built on mutual respect and survival. She never once asked what he was doing behind those heavily reinforced, padlocked wooden doors, and he never volunteered the information. Instead, every evening at precisely 6 o'clock, Julian would step out of the barn. For a brief moment, his hands covered in dark industrial grease, blisters, and calluses, and leave a perfectly chopped stack of firewood on Eleanor's porch. Alongside the wood, he would always leave a small, intricately hand-carved wooden animal, a sparrow, a deer, a fox, for a lonely woman who hadn't spoken to a friendly soul or received a kindness since her family passed. These silent tokens of gratitude were worth more than all the gold in the world. She began cooking double portions of hearty stew, leaving a warm, steaming bowl on the porch step, which would always disappear by morning, returned meticulously scraped clean. But while a fragile peace reigned within the boundaries of the widow's farm, a destructive storm was brewing in the heart of Blackwood. Arthur Pendleton rallied the angry local community at a town hall meeting, painting Julian as a dangerous parasite and an immediate threat to their children's safety. Fueled by this manufactured rage, local teenagers began a campaign of constant harassment, throwing heavy rocks through Eleanor's front windows and painting vicious, hateful slurs across her white picket fence. Through it all, Julian remained completely isolated in the barn, working with a frantic, desperate urgency that suggested he was running out of time. The sounds growing from the structure became louder, more complex, shifting from heavy hammer thuds to the high-pitched of intricate machinery and the distinct, low hum of a massive electrical current. The local power grid began to experience strange, terrifying fluctuations, dipping in voltage every time the barn's interior lit up with a brilliant, pulsing blue hue that illuminated the winter night sky. Sheriff Miller knew he couldn't legally intervene without a physical warrant, but Arthur Pendleton was growing deeply impatient. The wealthy tycoon decided to take matters into his own hands, hiring a group of rowdy, aggressive local laborers to keep a 24-hour watch on the property line, waiting for the stranger to make one wrong move. By the third month, the mystery had consumed the entire region, drawing unwanted attention from far beyond the valley's borders. People from neighboring towns were driving down the narrow gravel road every weekend just to gawk and catch a glimpse of what the local newspapers were now calling the haunted barn of a Blackwood. The immense pressure on Eleanor was becoming entirely too much to bear. Her health was rapidly failing under the weight of the town's relentless hostility, the sleepless nights, and the constant fear of an imminent attack taking a severe toll on her fragile, elderly frame. One bitterly cold afternoon, while the wind howled through the trees, she collapsed heavily on her front porch while trying to fetch her meager mail. Within seconds, the heavy barn doors flew wide open, something that had never happened in the daylight. Julian rushed out into the snow, his eyes wide with panic, lifting the frail woman into his strong arms with immense tenderness, and carried her inside the warmth of the house. He stayed by her bedside for 3 agonizing days, administering medicine, feeding her broth, and stoking the fireplace, temporarily abandoning his mysterious work altogether. It was during these quiet, vulnerable hours of recovery that Eleanor finally looked into his eyes and asked the question that had been burning in everyone's minds. "Why are you doing this, Julian? Why stay here in this frozen wasteland where everyone hates you, risks your life, and wants you gone?" Julian looked out the frosted window toward the silhouette of the barn, his eyes filling with a mixture of profound sorrow and fierce, unyielding determination. "Because, Eleanor," he whispered, his voice cracking with heavy emotion, "the world thinks I destroyed the only thing that mattered. They think I'm a monster, a failure who ruined lives. But in that barn, I am building the definitive proof that I was right. I am building a monument to the forgotten, and I will finish it or die trying." Before Eleanor could ask him to elaborate on his cryptic past, Julian stood up, returned to the freezing barn, and locked the heavy doors once more. The work resumed with double the intensity, as if he were trying to make up for the lost 3 days. The sounds coming from the structure were no longer just chaotic, mechanical clangs. They had transformed into something melodic, almost celestial, sending a hauntingly beautiful, deep resonance through the frozen ground that could be felt in the chest of anyone standing nearby. This bizarre transformation only terrified the superstitious townspeople further. Arthur Pendleton used his influence over the local radio station to declare that the stranger was practicing some form of dangerous occultism, or worse, building a weapon of mass destruction to level the town. He successfully managed to intimidate Sheriff Miller into signing an emergency eviction and search warrant, officially citing public safety hazards due to the erratic, dangerous power surges. The execution of the warrant was set for the exact date, marking Julian's 4th month in the barn. As the fateful day approached, the weather took a turn for the worst. A historic, record-breaking blizzard rolling into the valley, completely cutting off Blackwood from the rest of the world. The morning of the 4-month mark arrived with a blinding, merciless whiteout that trapped the valley in a cage of ice. Despite the raging, dangerous blizzard, a massive, angry crowd gathered behind Anuph Miller and a triumphant Arthur Pendleton as they marched toward the Vance property, armed with heavy crowbars, flashlights, and a burning desire for destruction. Eleanor stood on her front porch, wrapped in a faded, tattered blanket, tears literally freezing on her pale cheeks as she begged the mob to turn back and leave them in peace. Pendleton coldly shoved past the elderly woman, leading the aggressive mob toward the old barn. The rhythmic sounds had completely stopped. The entire valley was deathly silent, except for the howling, ferocious winter wind. Sheriff Miller stepped forward, pounding his heavy, gloved fist against the reinforced barn doors, demanding immediate entry in the name of the law. For a long, agonizing minute, there was absolutely no response, and Pendleton raised his crowbar to smash the lock. Then, with a deafening metallic groan that echoed across the mountains, the massive wooden doors slowly swung outward on their own. The crowd gasped, stepping back in absolute paralyzed shock. The interior of the old, decaying barn had been completely, unimaginably transformed into a state-of-the-art laboratory. Every single inch of the rotting wood had been reinforced with gleaming, polished steel plates, massive copper coils, and intricate wiring. But it wasn't the incredible architecture that stole the breath from their lungs. It was what stood directly in the center of the massive room. Towering over 15 feet high was a magnificent, hyper-realistic kinetic monument made entirely of recycled metal gears, and thousands of glowing fiber optic lights. As the crowd stared in stunned silence, Julian pulled a heavy lever, and the monument came to life. The massive gears turned flawlessly, without a single sound, and a breathtaking, three-dimensional holographic projection filled the entire barn, displaying the beautiful faces and names of hundreds of forgotten soldiers, impoverished families, and overlooked individuals from the history of Blackwood, including Eleanor's late husband and her deceased son, who had died in absolute anonymity years ago. Julian stepped forward from the shadows, holding a master control device. He wasn't a criminal, a fugitive, or a terrorist. He was Dr. Julian Vance, a world-renowned, disgraced visionary artist and clean energy engineer, whose previous public monument had tragically collapsed due to a corporate manufacturing defect he didn't cause, making him the ultimate scapegoat of the engineering world. He had fled to the most isolated place he could find to rebuild his masterpiece with his own hands, using his entire life savings to purchase the heavy materials delivered in secret. But this monument wasn't just art. It was a fully functioning, self-sustaining, clean energy generator, disguised as a tribute to the overlooked souls of the world. It was specifically engineered to hook directly into the town's failing, ancient power grid, providing completely free, limitless electricity to every single struggling family in Blackwood for generations to come. The realization hit the townspeople like a devastating physical blow. The man they had hunted, harassed, and condemned as a monster had spent 4 months in a freezing barn, sacrificing his health to create a gift that would save them all from economic ruin. Arthur Pendleton slowly dropped his crowbar into the snow, his face pale with immense shame, realizing his corporate greed had almost destroyed the greatest miracle the town had ever seen. Sheriff Miller slowly removed his winter hat, bowing his head in deep, silent reverence and apology. Eleanor wept openly, watching the beautiful, glowing, holographic image of her son smile down at her, finally acknowledged, finally remembered by the world. The deep-seated prejudice of Blackwood was shattered in an instant, replaced by an overwhelming collective wave of remorse, tears, and eternal gratitude. Julian had turned a symbol of isolation into a beacon of eternal hope. If this story of unexpected redemption, hidden brilliance, and the power of looking past judgment touched your heart today, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible cinematic narratives just like this one. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss another unforgettable journey. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next story.